welcome to this new session about open publishing, the editor's perspective. I am Francesco Santini from Basel. Co-moderating with me and definitely active part of the discussion will be Sophie Schaumann, who is co-organizer of MRI Together. And today we have 4 speakers, of whom 3 are present, but we hope that the 4th will join soon, who come from 4 different angles of publishing. The first one, we will start with Peter Jezzard, who is the editor-in-chief of Magnetic Resonance in Medicine. I think about towards open publishing, exactly in MRM. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Please, some housekeeping first. We have some question and answer box here. Please direct your questions there so that we can actually see them. It's better than using the chat. No question is too simple, but we will have a bit longer panel discussion in the end. So if we have some really burning question, we will answer right after the talk, but otherwise we will keep them for the end. But please write them there. Peter, thank you very much for being here, and please go ahead.
Thanks, Francesco. Can you just confirm that you can see my slide and hear me?
Yes, everything looks good.
Great. Firstly, everybody, apologies that we didn't manage to get the camera working. I only really have Safari set up, and evidently it doesn't.
Okay, it seems we're plagued by technical problems because we now just lost Peter's sound. Peter, unfortunately, we cannot hear you anymore. No, you're not muted. Maybe your computer is giving up on you.
You hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I have no idea what happened there. Let me try sharing screens again.
Go ahead.
Sharing your screen. Can you see that all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Perfect.
All right. I have no idea what's going on. Obviously, lots of problems with Safari. If I break up again, just shout up, Francesco, and we'll see if we can resolve it. So what I was going to try and cover was a bit of an introduction to publishing models, talk a little bit about subscription model, which is sort of the old journal model for reading journals versus open access, which is obviously the sort of the new model. I was going to tell you about open access trends for my journal, Magnetic Resonance in Medicine, and just give you a feel for where we are in that journey. And then I was going to tell you a few other things, not so much about open access, but more about reproducible science, and where we've got to with data availability statements, author-reader dialogue, functionality, and a few other initiatives that we've thought about. So I'm going to start by just...
I think you broke up again, Peter. This is yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, I mean, it's not your fault. It's because you don't use open source software. This is definitely the problem.
Shall I quit out and try and get back in with Firefox somehow? Let me see if I can set it up with Firefox. I will return in 10 minutes or so, but maybe somebody else can do the first talk then.
Yes. So
I'm afraid Firefox is my only other option, so I'll try and get that started.
Good luck, Peter. We are rooting for you to solve your technical problems.
Hopefully let me back in again.
So sorry about that. I hope that one of our other speakers is ready to step up. Sarahanne, would you feel up to the task? Perfect. So we have then Sarahanne Field from the Journal of Trial and Error, who is going to present about publishing your trials and your errors, and it's something that really, really interests me. Thank you very much for being here, Sarahanne, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let's see if I can get this off without a hitch. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Goodo. That's the first hurdle, isn't it? Let me see. Is that?
That was looking good. Yes. Yes.
Oh.
Perfect.
Awesome. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm super happy to be here. My name is Sarahanne Field, and I'm the Meta Science section editor for the Journal of Trial and Error, or JOTA, as I'll call it in the talk. And today I'm talking with you a little bit about my revolutionary journal and what we've been doing and what we're, how we do it. So publishing trials and errors in the scientific process. So my talk is divided up into a couple of parts: who we are, what motivated our foundation, what we actually do, and I'll mention a few interesting challenges and caveats that come with leading a revolution in the publishing world. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself to begin with, just so you know who the heck is in front of you talking. I have a background in psychology, and I've done a research master in psychometrics and statistics, so rather quantitative. For my doctoral research, I focused on an ethnographic study of the scientific reform community. And so I've kind of fallen in love with qualitative on the way. So I'm a mixed methodologist. I'm a meta-scientist. I'm not at all in the imaging field or any imaging field, but I hope that I have some perspectives on the Journal of Trial and Error, which can be interesting for you to take home with you as you keep working in imaging disciplines. So who are JOTA? These are 6 of the original team who founded the Journal of Trial and Error. These are, with the exception of the person in the middle with a pale grey shirt, these are all master students, or were all master students, from the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands. And at the end of 2018, they decided that open access just wasn't good enough. So open access is fabulous. All of us at JOTA, you'll notice actually that I'm not there in the photo. I'm not a founding member. I joined in May of last year. All of us at JOTA are convinced that although open access is obviously the way to go, we need to be doing a little bit more when it comes to publishing. So when you're only focusing on positive results, these shiny, sexy, novel findings, you're missing out on a lot of the bigger picture of science. And so that's what motivated the original foundation of JOTA. The idea that we're interested in giving access to all scientific knowledge. So if you think about science as being a system of knowledge that is built up through the scientific inquiry, we have a whole range of findings. We have a whole gamut when it comes to the processes that we pursue in scientific inquiry, and we have different ways of approaching that. We have different, results we end up at. And so the idea of JOTA is that it's not enough to just open access for everything, because then you're only really seeing the positive results that are published. We're interested in giving access to basically the entire scientific knowledge landscape. We're also interested in normalizing failure. So some of my colleagues who did found JOTA have spoken to me about how they spoke to other PhD students and master students who spend loads of time attempting to conduct experiments that ended up failing. And later on, they'd find out from colleagues or from senior researchers at conferences, that wasn't going to work. We've known that for years. But they had no idea, because those null results, those errors, that trial and error process of science just didn't make it into the publication record. And so part of what JOTA is doing is talking about these issues, right? The trial and error process that goes into science, and normalizing how we see failure, right? Failure is, no one likes failure. No one likes making mistakes, but they're an inevitable part of being human, and indeed part of the publishing process. And so normalizing these mistakes, normalizing that part of the process is a central part of what JOTA is focusing on. And finally, we're interested on reflecting on those mistakes, on error in science, and understanding how we can learn from those mistakes. So who I'm talking to, I'm guessing that you're familiar to some degree with this image. If not, you'll certainly be familiar with the whole dead salmon in the fMRI scanner. This example really influenced and excited my colleagues when they were first motivated to start JOTA. They thought, okay, this is great. Obviously, we're not going to get an active brain scan from a dead salmon looking at photographs. But the idea that this kind of thing is possible, that we can, for example, produce such an error, even in such a hilarious context of research, it's interesting to think about what we can learn from this particular error. So, you know, looking at resolution. Like I said, I have a background in psychology, so not imaging stuff, but I do know that when you scan a brain, you end up with loads and loads, thousands upon thousands of voxels, and some of them are going to be significant. But it's interesting to sort of see that with even such refined methodology, you end up with these kinds of errors. And so it's crucial to be able to see what went wrong and learn from that. And so that's, you know, part of what JOTA is also focusing on. To make this a little bit more concrete, I'll focus on two of the sort of gaps that JOTA kind of aims to engage with in the course of doing what we do. First, there's a huge gap between what's researched and what's published. So I mentioned briefly before publication bias. I don't think I need to go too much into that with people who are watching. This is by now a well-documented problem that what we see in the published literature is not what's gone on behind the scenes. We see a lot of positive findings, significant p-values, you know, Bayes factors greater than 3 and less than 0.3, where we're seeing a lot of you know, flashy, exciting findings in the literature, but we're missing the null results. We're missing the problems and the trial and error process that went into that research. So obviously, when we're talking about the difference between what's researched and what's actually published, we're talking about publication bias and reporting bias. So reporting bias, for those of you who are less familiar with the term, it's when people, researchers are hesitant to report findings that are not positive, exciting, null, novel, sexy. And that is largely due to publication bias, the fact that such findings are not publishable. It is very difficult, at least up until the last few years, it has been very difficult to publish null findings. And so that's part of what JOTA is really focused on, is sort of trying to get a little bit of the backstory about what's research, as well as publishing what went well. Another gap that we're interested in is the gap between what's sexy and what's reproducible. So what's sexy, again, what's novel, what's exciting, that you know, putting a dead salmon in an fMRI is hilarious, it's funny, it's interesting, it made an impact, and there's a reason why people like myself you know, end up with this example in talks, because it really is impactful. But there's a difference between what's sexy and what's reproducible. So I'm not sure whether we could too easily reproduce the you know, brain activity of a dead salmon being shown photographs. Maybe we could, but often, and again, I'm not sure how much I need to emphasize this, often what's exciting and novel is not necessarily the most reproducible research, or at the very least, I'll say it's not always the most trustworthy, it's not always the most valid and reliable research. There's plenty of correlation there, but I'm not sure it's a strong correlation. And so that's a gap that JOTA is focusing on exploring a little bit. So how do we do this? You know, and what kind of concrete things are we trying to look for with our journal? So we're interested in answering the question, what went wrong in your research? Or, you know, what didn't go to plan? What went differently or more complexly than what you expected? Again, the gap between what's research and what's published is clear here, because often research is a messy business. Again, excuse me, I don't think I need to tell anyone here that that's the case. So we use a couple of different formats or submission types at JOTA, for example, short communications, which sort of just discuss or problematize this issue of error in science. We also invite reflections based on these short communications, which act to kind of draw out some of the questions that are raised by those errors. We, as you know, my presence in the journal indicates, we welcome meta-science. So, you know, for example, reports of methodological problems, flaws in the use of technology and flaws in the use of tools, philosophy of science and reflections on the science of science, all of that kind of stuff is most welcome at JOTA. We're also interested in when stuff doesn't get accepted and why that might be. So we're interested in rejected grant applications and peer reviews with a focus of, okay, what went wrong here, and why were these applications not accepted? So what drew me in to JOTA? And this will highlight a little bit more about what the journal actually does. As I mentioned before, I'm a meta-scientist, and more specifically, I'm a scholar of the scientific reform movement, or the scientific reform community behind that movement. I'm interested basically in how we improve science, what the community does to do that. I do that myself as well. The research I conduct is focused on improving science. And so for me, focusing on the gestalt of research, so not just the product, but also the process that goes into creating that product, I'm fascinated by that. And if we only focus on you know, flashy, positive findings, significant p-values, we're missing that gestalt. And that's what I'm really interested in. So when I found out about JOTA, I was fascinated by this, and I thought, oh, I've got to get in on some of that action. I also thought, you know, if I'm interested, there are going to be more of my colleagues that are interested. And indeed, that has been the case. We're seeing a big increase in especially meta-scientific articles for the journal. And lastly, I had some selfish reasons to be joining JOTA as well. When I started with JOTA, I was already fascinated by a couple of different things that I wanted to spark some debate in the community, in my community, that is, in the scientific reform and meta-science community. For example, I was interested in the long-term consequences of scientific reform activity. So we have all of these exciting changes in relation to transparency and open science, for example, and these are great. But when you mess with certain elements of a huge system such as science, with so many moving parts and so many interlinked elements, you really need to anticipate what's going to happen down the track. And so I have I've used JOTA quite selfishly to be a platform for that special issue. So that's kind of what drew me in, and that's why JOTA is so appealing to me, and may also be for some of you. So I want to go through a couple of challenges that have come up with you know, with such a revolutionary journal. Obviously, we're going against the status quo. We're avant-garde in a lot of senses because we're a very non-traditional journal that's trying to keep pace with traditional journals. So we're Diamond Open Access. We're funded entirely by the Utrecht University and the Descartes Center for Research. And so that in itself has its own challenges. So for example, operational challenges, we struggle with funding. Although we do have certain promised funding for a certain amount of years, it's still not a lot of money. And so we're having to operate on a skeleton team that involves almost entirely volunteers, which is pretty challenging. We're also, we come up with some interesting challenges that relate to pluralism in the team. We have a huge range of different people that work at JOTA. And so unlike a lot of more traditional journals where there's a clear hierarchy, we're relatively non-hierarchical, and although we do have a scientific board that I'm part of, we largely try and do things in a democratic sense. So, you know, discussing among the group and finding out the best solution. That's not always easy when you don't have a hierarchical system. And thirdly, articulating editorial bias. This is something that I've come across relatively recently. As I mentioned, I've got this exciting special issue that's been brewing, and I am the editor-in-chief of that. I have 2 guest editors that work with me on that special issue. And again, the topic is unintended consequences of science reform. So you could kind of see that as being unpopular opinions about science reform, because that's some of the content of what we're looking at. So we currently have 14 articles that are being put into full-sized contributions. 2 of those are accepted, and 10 of them are currently in review process, and a few are still coming. And a lot of them are sort of these unpopular opinions, questioning some of the taken for granted assumptions within the science reform movement. Now, I'm a strong science reform advocate. It's my community. I'm an activist within that community. And I'm really on board with a lot of the things we do, especially in general, just improving science. But one of the real challenges that I've come across as an editor in this journal, and specifically in the special issue, is thinking about how to articulate my particular bias as an editor. So thinking about my role in that process as editor as a curator of a collection of knowledge that is contextualized within a larger system of knowledge. So I'm co-producing knowledge with authors, and it's a fascinating and sometimes challenging position to be in, to kind of think of my own reflexivity, thinking about how I influence that role and how can I best articulate that role for myself as an editor. So one of the things I study is reflexivity, the idea that we should have this constant introspection about our role in the research process. That the scholarship on that tends to focus on the individual researcher and their role, the person who's submitting the research, rather than the person who's handling the submissions. So I'm really interested. I think it's a responsibility of an editor to somehow articulate some of their position and the role they play in co-producing that knowledge. So that's been a challenge that some of you might find interesting in your own roles as editors, in the publishing system. I'm finishing a little early because we're already running a tad late. So I want to quickly finish up by mentioning 2 important caveats. Firstly, if any of you are interested in actually submitting to our journal, do know that we're not a journal that's looking for sloppy research. So I'm not implying that any of you are going to do sloppy research and submit it, but that don't be concerned about what we're accepting. We still are selective. We're interested in well done research that basically explores what went wrong and asks what we can learn from it. So we're looking at elucidating the process of trial and error rather than publishing crappy stuff, if that makes sense. And we don't want to publish everything. If we published all of the contents of everyone's file drawers, we'd end up with an incredibly messy body of literature that wouldn't really be useful for much building on, right? So we're interested in again, elucidating that trial and error process, but not necessarily publishing everything. So hopefully that helps a little bit with clarifying some of what we do, why we do it, and why it's an exciting and revolutionary journal to keep an eye out for. So thank you. That's what I had to add tonight.
Thank you very much, Sarahanne. It's I don't want to brag, but in terms of failure, I'm quite an expert myself. So I think I will have quite a lot of questions for you in the panel discussion in the end. I think you're raising some very interesting points, and at least for me, there are some open questions that I would like to explore, also to be able to contribute to your journal. For now, it doesn't seem that there are any pressing questions in the Q&A box, so I would continue with Peter. I think we go back to our original schedule. Peter, are you up to everything is up and running from your side?
Fingers crossed. We haven't tried a shared screen, but let's try that now. Yeah. Okay, for some reason. Okay, Joyce, Firefox doesn't want to let me share it. MRI together. Select window or screen. Entire screen.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
So I've got to go through open. We did try this with Safari, and it was apparently working without my video, but now it's not.
It doesn't allow you to share the entire screen?
Okay, so I'm afraid I've got to quit. It says I've got to quit Firefox for this to share. So,
okay, So,
the talk, and I'll try yet again.
So we are very dynamic.
You should have used Zoom, guys. It's a lot easier.
Hopefully, third time lucky.
Yeah, sorry. I'll see you back next time.
Sanchari, sorry to put you on the spot. Does everything work from your side?
I hope so. I think I took care of any complaints that my computer was throwing at me. Let me try the screen sharing now and see how that goes.
But we are all learning, so we can learn how to use this platform. It looks
do you okay, and can you see my slides now?
Yes, that looks fantastic.
Right.
So just let me say who you are. We're joined by Sanchari Ghosh from the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, and she's representing bioRxiv. So yet another corner of the publication world. Thank you very much for being here, Sanchari. We're looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you for the introduction. And just to give an overview of what I want to talk about today is more or less how bioRxiv functions from this corner of the scientific milieu, where we don't publish, we host preprints, and how we go about it, and what we hope to contribute to the scientific atmosphere going forward now as well as going forward. So I'm the content specialist of bioRxiv. I'm a member of a 5-people team who look at manuscripts that come in to bioRxiv and medRxiv, and I'll talk briefly about medRxiv as well. We hope that through our work, we are able to provide a solution to the problem that has it has hindered a lot of progress in academia over years, and that problem is the slowness of the publication system. So what you're looking at is the journey of a scientific manuscript through the journal system that starts with an author who submits it to the journal, goes to the editor where it could get rejected or could be sent to multiple reviewers for their opinions. And this could happen, and once the reviewers have come up with their evaluations, it goes back to the editor, and this is like the part of the cycle that can happen over many, many times. Like the manuscript could be stuck in the same journal across different rounds of reviews, or it could go through many different journals and multiple rounds of reviews. And usually this process may involve anything. Sorry, was there a question?
No, I think it was just an echo.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
So this can happen, this process can unfold over many months and sometimes, unfortunately, even years. And only once this has been accepted by the editor after revisions by the author and like ethical checks and proof checks can this be made available to the public. And when I say public, there's a qualifier. It could be restricted by subscriptions or pay-per-views, so it might be available under conditions. Now, what preprints have done is essentially decoupled the process of dissemination of information from the certification process that a peer-reviewed journal provides. So essentially, a preprint is an unreviewed work of science that is shared by the author when the authors are ready to share it with the larger scientific community. And what we do is sort of add a conduit to this entire, the previous slide that you saw. And by doing this, the authors can submit to the journal process as usual as before, but they also have the option of submitting it to a preprint server by which they can share it with the public, as well as the broader scientific community. And one essential difference is, because we don't provide any peer review, we don't provide any certification of the work, it's fairly economically, it's more convenient for us to host a lot of research with minimal cost. which makes it possible for us to make it free at the both point of views, both for the readers as well as for the authors. So people can submit without money, people can read and access without paying money. And you could always ask, like, why do it? Why should scientists post preprints? And this is something that we were also concerned about, like, would they post preprints? If they do, why would they do it? And this is a result of a poll that bioRxiv conducted several years ago, and I'm sure some of the salient features probably will remain the same. The first motivation for scientists is to actually increase awareness of their work. I mean, all of us who come from a scientific background are aware of how closed an environment it can be to sit in your lab and just do research. And it's always refreshing to go into a conference where you can share your work. And preprint just gives you that opportunity to do that without paying any money as soon as you think you are ready to share your science. So increasing awareness of their work was one huge motivation. And the other was, of course, benefiting science, like knowing what's going on, what's the next step a bit early in your scientific career actually helps the overall scientific process. And the next four reasons, if you think about it, it actually comes down to author control. Like, they want to share their research when they are ready for it. They want to make a claim of priority that this is when I started doing this work. They want to receive feedback, which is like more open probably because they're sharing it with a wider audience. And they want to be able to cite their research as a proof of productivity. And of course, there are some people who do it because it's a cool thing to do these days. But there was enough motivation to start the process of sharing their work with preprints. Now, this is just a couple of examples which like real life examples. The one on the left is from Samantha Hindle, who is a member of our content team. And this is from the ASCB conference that's going on right now. She actually met someone who was in the process of applying for a K-99 grant, and she couldn't get her paper published in time, but she posted it as a preprint, cited it in her application, and it helped her achieve the K-99 award. Similar stories have unfolded in a purely research setting where science has benefited. And this is one example where a paper on GPCRs was posted on bioRxiv, and then there was a Twitter discussion that followed. And within 10 to 20 days, they set up a collaboration with an independent lab from a different institute, and they started sharing resources even before the paper was done with the review process. So by the time the paper actually got accepted in a journal, they had already started in vivo experimentation. And we, like people who have been through the rigmarole of starting experiments, and especially like in vivo experiments, you'll know like these things take time. So if you can fast track that by several months, it just makes the process of progress much faster. And they had like samples available for sequencing and analysis almost at the same time that the manuscript just got published. So it does bring, it not only helps people involved in science establish their credibility as by proving what they have done, by showing their outputs, it also helps the process of science move forward faster. And just to make sure that, just to inform anyone who hasn't submitted a bioRxiv preprint about what it takes to get your work posted. This is just to give you a view of what goes on beyond what happens to your manuscript once you submit to bioRxiv. So we start with an author submitting a paper, and when through the submission system, we want the authors to make sure 4 things are happening. One is that they're submitting a research paper, because we focus entirely only on research manuscripts. We only host those. We do insist that authors have checked with all their co-authors that everyone is on board with the process of preprinting, and that the work they are submitting is not being accepted for publication in any journal. And also, it's useful if they want to publish, assuming they want to publish it in the future, that the journal that they have in mind is supportive of preprints. Otherwise, they get into there might be conflicts. Although I'll get into this later, that this problem is almost resolved by now. So once we get a paper, we have a line of screeners who check the paper for all essentials. We make sure everything that is required, like the required components, the titles, the affiliations, abstract methods, all of those are present. And then it goes on to a body of affiliates. And we have about 170 affiliates on bioRxiv who are all practicing scientists who then look at the paper, and they look for three things. They first want to make sure it's a research paper. They want to make sure it's not pseudoscience. We don't want to increase crappy or sloppy work that is not science. And then the other thing, because it's open to public, we make sure that none of the conclusions can cause public alarm or cause harm if shared with the general public. So once the 95% of our submissions that go on to the affiliates usually are okayed, and the paper just posts on bioRxiv, and this happens within a matter of hours to days. Every now and then we'll get a paper which the affiliate would consider not okay for posting, and then they would send it back to us, which is where we step in as staff, and then there could be multiple issues, and we can talk about it in the Q&A section, what the issues are. Sometimes it requires a back and forth with the author. Sometimes it's just something that we cannot post, and we end up rejecting. During COVID-19, the burden on checking everything became way higher on us because we had to react responsibly to a global health crisis. And one of the things that we did was we created an outbreak affiliate group who were scientists who specialized in outbreak science, and all COVID-19 related papers were siphoned into that group exclusively, who would then do the special outbreak screening. And something that they looked out for is especially the do no harm considerations, with keeping in mind like it wasn't spreading conspiracy theories, and it wasn't advocating for self-medication using like traditional medicines or easily available over-the-counter drugs without proper scientific proof. So even with the additional checks, most of our COVID-19 papers got posted on bioRxiv. If they had any issues, again, they sent it back to us and we did further verifications. Now, as a preprint server, bioRxiv is extremely journal agnostic. So we we don't automatically assign papers to journals once they come into us. It's entirely the control of that remains with the authors. But we do have journal partners where we make the process a little bit easier. So the J2B service is a partnership with certain journals who allow sending your manuscript from the journal submission system directly to bioRxiv if you haven't already posted it on bioRxiv. And we also have B2J service, where if you have posted something on bioRxiv and you want to submit it to a journal, we make the process easier by providing you a list of partner journals where you can just click on the journal and click transfer, and your main manuscript files and supplementary information gets transferred to their submission system. Depending on the journal, you might have to complete their separate submission system whatsoever, but effectively this process becomes much simpler with this transfer system. And then it goes through the usual peer review and ends up in a formal publication. The other advantage of preprints is the versioning, which is something that you can never do with a published paper. You can never revise a published paper, but with a preprint, you can always do that up to the point where it's published in a journal. And this process is extremely simple and very fast, where you just submit your revision to the same manuscript ID. And as admins, we check that everything that's there that was supposed to be there is there in the version, and that it is not a major overhaul of your previous work, in which case we might involve an affiliate. If everything checks out, we just post it directly on bioRxiv. And these informations are available. Like this is a typical window of a bioRxiv preprint, where if you go into the info history tab, you can see the history of the version that you're looking at. and also the previous version, such as, like, as you can see, this one was posted almost 6 months before the current version. And if you scroll further down, it also provides your revision history that most authors are encouraged to provide, detailing what the change in the latest version was. And if you go to the previous version, and if you're viewing, if you have a link to a previous version of a manuscript, we always have this flag that alerts you that there is a current version that's available. And once the article is published in a journal, we always link it to the published version easily from the preprint page. Now, to move on to medRxiv, I realized a lot of fMRI and imaging like studies also involves humans and patients, and there's often this contention we deal with, like, is this paper for bioRxiv or medRxiv? So I thought introducing medRxiv to this audience might be helpful. medRxiv is the sister server for bioRxiv, which specializes in health sciences, and we have very similar criteria that we focus on, mostly research articles, although medRxiv does accept other clinical article types, such as systematic reviews or clinical protocols that don't have that don't always have data. But there are a few things that they look for. They want to make sure that all clinical trials are registered and the trial IDs are provided, and all of these works are done conforming with the required ethics and checks. So any paper that gets submitted to medRxiv is also checked by an initial screener, where they look for all of these issues and make sure they are there, and then it moves to an affiliate who is generally a clinician, and they also look for do no harm considerations and the fact that it's a research paper that's good to go. And once they consider it okay, it goes and posts on medRxiv. medRxiv, like bioRxiv, has journal partners where J2M and M2J services are available, although the numbers of journals that partner with are lower because medRxiv is more recent, but it's a growing number, and hopefully we can make it easier along the years. Also, for medRxiv preprints, versioning is very easy. If you identify something you want to change in your preprint once posted, you just have to submit a second version or a subsequent version. It'll go through the initial checks, make sure everything is okay, all the ethics checks and stuff are fine, and it'll get posted pretty much immediately. This is just to give you an outline of the differences in acceptance criteria. Where bioRxiv, we are fairly, the main thing we focus on is it must be a complete research paper. We don't accept reviews or perspectives or other kind of non-research papers. We want to make sure it includes some new data or new analysis. And one of the things that we come across very often is bioinformatic tools or notes that just announce the creation of a tool, but we very often send it back, and it's not a rejection, it's a return to the author that please add either output of the tool or some data that validates the benefit of using this tool. Whereas medRxiv, they only accept health-related articles. They check, they look, they also take clinical research design protocols, systematic reviews, meta-analysis, and bibliometric studies. They do take clinical trials and observational studies that are not observational studies which are not hypothesis-based. But the two things they are very picky about is it must not include any identifying information for the patients because it's a public forum, and it also must include all the appropriate ethical declarations. We do work very closely as these two sister servers, so any clinical or epidemiological studies that get submitted to bioRxiv, or anything that shows that a causal relation between genes and diseases or environmental factors and diseases would get transferred from bioRxiv to medRxiv via an internal process. And similarly, if medRxiv receives in vitro studies or preclinical studies done in animal models, they get sent over to bioRxiv as well. Now, preprints are not only for authors to claim authorship and share their work, it's also for readers to engage. We have about 10 million views of preprints across the two sites. So people are reading preprints as well, and we make it easier for readers to engage with preprints as and when they see fit. For that, we now have a revised dashboard where it literally opens this dashboard on the right of the screen if you click on any of these tabs, and you can comment by going on the comment tab, and any reader can actually comment on preprints available on bioRxiv and medRxiv. We do host peer reviews by certain trip partners, the eLife being one of them. We have community reviews, which very often come in as journal club reviews or other such reviewing services, which go through the preprint and do pretty much very, very similar to peer review like evaluations. We also link to media coverage of the preprint, as well as the tweets that go out. bioRxiv and medRxiv do tweet out every preprint that gets posted, but this also this tab also includes activity reusing that Twitter handle. The review in preprints is something that was started, I think, a few years ago and has become extremely popular. And this is where we see the future moving, where people will post preprints on bioRxiv or medRxiv, or like hopefully bioRxiv and medRxiv, but maybe also other preprint servers. And then reviewing services will evaluate those and publicly post their opinions on the trip tab or the community reviews tab. And this evaluation will also be available to readers along with the scientific product. So most often with the journal system, we don't have access to what went on behind the scenes, behind the peer review curtain, but this would bring it all out in the open, making the process more transparent, both for authors and for readers. And over the last several, like 7 or 8 odd years that we've existed, we have made significant progress. Now across bioRxiv and medRxiv, we host about 210,000 preprints. 30% of them undergo revisions, often multiple times. As I said, we have 10 million views per month across bioRxiv and medRxiv. So people are not only posting preprints, people are reading preprints. And almost 70% of the papers that have started as preprints go on to subsequently be published in journals. This is reflected in a culture change in the scientific community as well. So a major change in behavior of scientists. More and more biologists are actually posting, reading, and citing preprints. Journals, as I said before, I'll circle back that most journals now allow preprint posting, and they're pretty much okay with preprints, like reviewing stuff that has already been posted as a preprint. Funders not only allow, several funders have now started mandating preprints that are funded, that is the product of science that's been funded by their grants. Many hiring committees in universities and research institutes now encourage preprints in their application. And just like this has made it easier for people to present more recent data at meetings, because they can post a preprint before they go into a meeting. They have made sure that they have made priority claims on their work, and then they can just share that without the fear of being scooped. And the availability of the preprint system has been extremely helpful for early career researchers. And Joe Becquerel, whose tweet I'm citing here, is one of the bioRxiv affiliates who benefited a lot because he submitted an NIH grant with manuscript in preparation in the first round, and then he got it rejected, came back, he submitted a preprint on the same work and submitted it with the DOI of the preprint, and it got accepted. So he swears by the preprinting process himself. Now, going forward, we expect that preprint servers will serve as a hub where it will be a host for authors to share their work, readers to discover, and several discovery services like Google Scholar, Semantic Scholar, and Crossref, which actually do index preprints now, to serve as discovery tools. This should help in reproducibility because we do accept confirmatory and contradictory results, which don't need to be like as detailed papers, but they need to have analysis and new data. Preprints can be used as tools for discussion, because we do see that several preprints trigger discussions in the comment section or even in Twitters, and there are blogs and news articles written about them before they can get published. And then we hope to work closely with the certification system, where journals are the obvious partners, but we hopefully this hub can serve as an ecosystem to generate new tools that can provide certifications for research work. And this has actually started happening. There are multiple alternatives to peer review that have started coming up, especially during the COVID-19, when reviewing was taking too long and people wanted to get involved and vet the quality of science that was coming out rapidly in preprints in the form of rapid reviews COVID-19 and the Sinai immunology. But we also have people like eLife now has the trip reviews where it's publicly available, and the Review Commons and PCI also review preprints and post them openly for readers to access. Last but not the least, I would like to acknowledge the in-house team members, the co-founders, both for bioRxiv and the medRxiv partners, and the in-house team that support us go through the day-to-day journey. And with that, I'll take any questions you have.
Thank you very much. I really love preprints. I think they only have advantages and no disadvantage. I have used medRxiv in my career, and yeah, you also do very thorough checks. It came back a couple of times because we didn't put the right wording for the ethics and so on. But it's good. I think it's very positive. As before, I think the questions are not really burning that can not be answered in the last part. I think I would move on then to Peter Jezzard from Magnetic Resonance in Medicine. And we're really looking forward to hearing about the steps that MRM is taking.
We'll try third time lucky. So Mo is standing by with my slides if this doesn't work. Can you hear me now?
Yes, okay. Loud and clear.
Let me try sharing it again. Okay. So can you just confirm that you can see that?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. Interrupt if my sound goes squiffy again. So I'm going to skip over the summary slide and we'll go straight into the sort of first main slide. I wasn't quite sure of the audience and how much everybody knows about the different models of publishing. So I thought I would start by just describing the different types of model that you have as a reader for gaining access to papers. So historically, most journals were subscription journals, in that libraries subscribed to them or individuals subscribed to them. They were behind a paywall, and you needed to have a subscription or you needed to purchase the content in order to gain access. And there's still quite a lot of journals that use this model, but it is a sort of decreasing number. Increasingly, however, there are a lot of so-called hybrid journals. And these are journals that have some free content that's available to all readers, and they have some content that's still behind a paywall and is only accessible if you have a subscription or if you purchase the article. So in order to get your paper made available to all readers, the authors have to pay an open access fee, a so-called article processing charge. And if they do that, then the paper becomes open access for any reader. But otherwise, if they don't do that, then it stays behind the paywall. I should point out that a growing number of institutions have so-called transformative agreements with the publisher, which allow the authors to automatically be able to publish their papers open access if they're a member of a participating institution. So you might want to check if you are a member of such an institution if you don't already know. And then another model, which is a few years old now and is obviously becoming increasingly popular, is a fully open access model. And this is where all of the content that is in the journal is free to all readers. The standard model is called Goldell Open Access, and this is again where the author pays an article processing charge to have their paper published in the journal. And again, many institutions have agreements with publishers that make this a fairly straightforward process. There's also some waivers that are made available for authors who can't afford the APC charge. Maybe they're in countries that just don't have that kind of income. You've already heard about a Diamond Access open access journal. These are quite rare. These are journals where neither the author nor the reader is charged to access the article, but they do require some kind of funder or for libraries to fund the content. And as I say, these are quite rare. And then finally, there's Green Open Access, in which the author accepted version of the manuscript is posted on a repository, for example, PubMed Central. But usually the publisher will require an embargo period. And so, for example, if you have NIH funding, then this is the model that you will be using, and your paper will be published on PubMed Central after a year as effectively an open access paper. And then finally, we've heard about preprint servers where there is no peer review, although maybe you can have unofficial peer review. And you've heard about the both bioRxiv and medRxiv. So where does my journal, Magnetic Resonance Medicine, sit at the moment? So currently it is a hybrid-based journal. So in other words, some of the content is made available free to readers. Those are from authors who have either personally or their institution has paid an article processing charge. And then we also do allow the Green Open Access with an embargo period. So you are at liberty to post your material on a repository, for example, PubMed Central, European PubMed Central, after a 12-month embargo. And then, as we heard about many journals tolerating preprints, this was something that was not that common a few years ago, but now many journals do tolerate preprints, and certainly MRM is very happy to receive an article that has appeared as a preprint already. Now, I just want to show you where we are on the kind of journey towards what I think is likely to end up being an open access journal. I think a lot of journals are witnessing this. So this is the percentage of content published in Magnetic Resonance Medicine that is being published open access. And you can see that as recently as 2015, 95% of the material was behind a paywall and only 5% was open access. But then as time has gone by, that's grown. And in 2022, which we're not quite finished yet, we're approaching 50%. So almost half the content in Magnetic Resonance Medicine is published via open access. And that's largely because of transformational agreements rather than necessarily authors paying themselves. So there are a number. We have a partnership with Wiley. So Magnetic Resonance Medicine is one of the two official journals of the ISMRM. And we have a partnership with Wiley, who actually publish on our behalf, although the journal is owned by the society. But Wiley have set up a large number and a growing number of so-called transformative agreements with many different territories. They're often done at national level or at some sort of consortium level between many universities. And again, if you're in any of the territories on this slide, then I would encourage you to visit the Wiley website and find out if your institution is part of a transformative agreement, because if it is, then you should be eligible to have your work published as an open access article via a fairly simple process after acceptance. Now, to that list has recently been added quite a few US institutions. And this is a fairly new thing. Previously, the US didn't participate very much in open access. It's still something which is somewhat rare, but nevertheless, you can see quite a few consortiums have started to negotiate agreements with Wiley. And this is just to show you the geographic trends. Open access is still very much a European thing. It was European funders that agitated for their funded research to be published open access. And so it's Europe where we have a large majority of our authors who are participating in open access. And these are the 2022 figures up to 31st of October, which is where I have good data. And you can see that 86% of papers published in MRM from Europe were open access. North America, it's actually 28%. Now, quite recently, it was pretty much 0%, but it is actually more than a quarter now, which is probably a cause of some of those agreements that I just showed you in the previous slide. East Asia, it's quite light. Less than 10% of papers are published open access. I think some other journals, open access journals, certainly have not seen a big drop in submissions from East Asia. So if we were to go open access, then I think that we probably would still attract submissions from East Asia. But as things stand, you can see that those authors do not choose to publish open access. And then again, very recently, Australia and New Zealand have kind of transitioned from being very much a subscription-based model to more of a transformative agreement open access model. And this year, we've got 75% of papers from those territories, albeit small numbers of papers that have been published open access. And just to drill down into a couple of example countries specifically, you can see Germany, which went from virtually no open access content in 2017 to actually this year, I'm expecting 100% of the papers that are published from Germany will be open access. This is through a very large transformative agreement, which is at national level, called Project Deal, that was negotiated with Wiley. So Germany is really leading the field here. You can see that the UK is pretty strong as well. It had a mandate from many of its funders to publish open access for actually a number of years, which is why you can see that there have been open access publications from the UK for quite a long time, because the funders were providing money for that. But now there are sort of nationally agreed schemes which make it very simple for the authors to publish open access. And so you can see I'm expecting about almost 95% of papers from the UK will be open access. China, you can see quite light, but there's some activity. And then the US is the interesting one, where activity very, very low until recently. By the end of 2022, I'm expecting about 50 papers, which is about 28% of the content that we will likely publish from North America, from the USA. Now I want to move to discussing a few reproducible research issues, because I think they're relevant and of interest to this group. And firstly, tell you about the story of MRM's experience with data availability statements. Now, different journals have different practices with data availability statements. Some journals make no mention at all in their author guidelines of including a data availability statement, or they just don't make provision for it. Some journals will encourage the use of a data availability statement, but not require it. Some journals may require it even if there is no data that can be provided. In other words, you have to declare that there is no data or code if you don't have any. Some will require things like Jupyter notebooks so that figures can be reproduced. Some may go as far as requiring that code and data is deposited in a repository somewhere, and some may even specify which repository that has to go for. And so you can see that there's kind of an increasing author burden on these different models. But then again, hopefully it is encouraging reproducible research. In terms of magnetic resonance in medicine, currently we are parked here. So we encourage, indeed strongly encourage, the use of a data availability statement in authors' papers, but we don't require it. And this is because many of our authors work with vendors. They have research agreements with the vendors that make it difficult to freely provide code. Now, we could certainly consider moving to requiring a statement even if there is no code or data to be provided, but at the moment we simply encourage it. So this is the statement that's in the author guidelines, that the journal strongly encourages authors to facilitate the reproducibility of their research by sharing publicly source code and data. And this was a statement which was discussed with the reproducible research study group within ISMRM, and they are currently, at least they advised that they were content with this statement. In terms of the papers, you get a statement at the end of the paper like this. We'd certainly encourage people to go as far as getting a DOI for the link that they are providing, so that there's some sort of longevity of that link. Additionally, we ask our reviewers to comment, or at least to answer a question, on whether they think the authors have gone to any special efforts to provide code or data. And I have noticed anecdotally that that authors can be prompted by this question when they get their revisions to go a bit further the next time. So, you know, sometimes they will not provide any code or data in their first submission. The authors will note that. They may even note it in their review. And then the reviewers may note that, and the authors will decide in their revision that they're going to go to a bit more effort. And so sometimes this can turn from a double no answer in the first submission to a double yes answer in the revision, which is always nice to see. We've also started to try and highlight those papers that have gone to some kind of effort, or at least that have been brought to our attention by the reviewers when we circulate our contents list. So hopefully this is just trying to make sure that it's in the front of people's minds that the journal would like to see data availability statements, and indeed ideally code and data provided. Now, Matthew Boudreau, who is one of the deputy editors in the journal and has been tasked with keeping an eye on social media and also reproducibility, did an analysis recently where he searched all of the papers published in 2019 and 2021 for the following terms, just to get a feel for how people, well, whether people had responded differently to some of the efforts that we've made over the last year or two. And pleasingly, what he saw was that in 2019, only about 1 in 10 papers shared any kind of code or data. Whereas by 2021, which was only 1 year after we had introduced some of these new schemes, we were almost up to 1 in 3 papers. And you can see that within those papers, you have some interesting trends with the type of code in particular that is shared. And I just thought I'd share this graph with you. It's sort of interesting that clearly MATLAB is slowly going out of fashion. Python is coming into fashion. C++ maybe is going out of fashion a bit as well. Additionally to this, and this came up in one of the other talks that you heard earlier, MRM has introduced a so-called discourse forum. This is a reader-author sort of informal discussion board, which you can find at the web link at the top there. Unfortunately, this has not been very well taken up by readers. I would love to know why. I've been told that it's because people prefer to use Twitter. So maybe if Elon Musk manages to break Twitter next week, you'll all start using this. But I want to draw your attention to it. We are seeing so little use of it that we probably will discontinue it if it doesn't start to get some use. So please do go and register. It's free. You can comment on a paper. It will hopefully send a message to the authors, or we will make sure that they get a message and they can respond. So if you have queries about papers or just comments, then you can go and add that to this site. And in terms of the finding it from a given paper, this is the Wiley online website, and you can see you can just click through to that website from the Wiley online site as well. And additionally, Matthew is who's very passionate about reproducible research, has been featuring some of the papers that have done a particularly good job, and having a Q&A with those authors, interviewing them, and then publishing that on the MRM Highlights website. So again, I'd encourage you to go and look at some of those articles if you'd like to see some good examples of reproducible research and what people have done to accomplish that. A few other sort of semi-related issues, some are directly, some less directly related to this kind of topic. So we have considered registered reports. There may be some in the audience who don't know what registered reports are, but essentially this is a scheme whereby you can submit your paper in the form of just an introduction and a method section, and have that reviewed. And if the reviewers think that it's a worthy project, then you get an in-principle acceptance from the journal. You can go ahead and conduct the research and it will get published, assuming you follow the methods that have been agreed. So the advantage of this type of approach is that it should, in theory, minimize any temptation for post hoc hacking of the data, and it should minimize the repetition of well thought through but failed experiments, so that you can still publish that experiment that was a great idea, but unfortunately it didn't work. Some of the disadvantages are that it's not really a great fit for exploratory methods journals like ours, and that there can be some issues with ethics and funding if the reviewers come back and say you need to add another 60 people and you didn't have the money for that, or you don't have the ethics, then you've got to go and scrabble around to do that. And for a journal like MRM, at least, it's unlikely to attract a very high number of submissions. But nevertheless, it was thought about and discussed by the editorial board. Another topic that we discussed was transparent reviewing. And this is where the reviews are made available, and indeed, under one model, the reviews are signed, so that that there's absolute transparency for the reviewing process. Now, the advantages of this is that it is thought to encourage a fairer and more rigorous review system. People are going to pay a bit more attention if their reviews are going to be made publicly available. And it also makes that review exchange process that is very valuable, available to readers if they want to just see what the back and forth was between the authors and the reviewers. And if they are signed, then of course you are explicitly recognizing the reviewer's contribution, because they are putting a lot of effort into these reviews, and often they get minimal credit for them. Some of the disadvantages are that there's concerns, especially if they're signed reviews, that you can get some very fawning reviews. It may put off reviewers from reviewing at all if they know that the review is going to be published, especially if it's going to have their name on it. And it may lead to backlash from unhappy authors. And one comment that's been made to me is, do readers really want more to read? They've already got the article, the supplementary material. Do they really want to delve into the reviews as well? But again, this is something that MRM has thought about and discussed. And then a final topic that we discussed was double-blind reviewing. And this is where neither the reviewers nor the authors know the identity of one another. Historically, MRM has been a single-blind journal, so the reviewers know who the authors are, but the authors don't know who the reviewers are. So this is just making it blind in both directions. One of the perceived benefits of this is that it should reduce bias in the reviewers, so they should not be biased against particular countries or institutions or particular authors. And that another advantage, and I think I've got this the wrong way around, it says less author burden. There's actually a bit more author burden for having to double blind your paper, and also I think I've got some of these in the wrong way around. So for single blind reviewing, conflicts of interest are more evident. So it's actually a bit of a con to not know who the authors are if you're a reviewer. But there are some other cons. For example, there's an incompatibility with preprints, because you could very easily go and find the preprint and then, of course, unblind. And it is more author burden to anonymize, and it can be extra effort for the editorial office to police if it's being done rigorously. Now, as I say, these three topics have been discussed by the MRM editorial board, and I have to say that the first two have, at least for now, been rejected and not taken forwards. The double-blind reviewing model we are using in an experimental form, so we have an experiment running that, in theory, is coming towards the end of its 2-year run. And then we're going to look and see how it's performed and whether there's any evidence of it reducing bias. So we've got various metrics that we can check. I may need to run it for a bit longer, because the number of people who've actually engaged in this double-blind experiment is not as high as I thought it would be. And so we may need a slightly bigger number to be able to get some sensible data from it. But at the end, I hope that we'll be able to do a very interesting analysis of the benefits and maybe disadvantages of double-blind reviewing. So that awaits. So finally, some open questions for MRM. Should MRM require a data availability statement, even if it's to declare that there is no code and data to share? That's something that we could discuss at the next editorial board meeting. So far, we've not decided to do that. Should reviewers be obliged to look at code and/or data that is provided? I think this is maybe an open question for the Q&A. It would be a huge burden to the reviewers if the journal required it, if it was expected. Of course, I think it's great if reviewers are willing and interested in downloading things and having a look, but I can see many practical problems to requiring it. But certainly we would encourage Jupyter notebooks to reproduce figures where possible. Another question which came up was, should ISMRM provide its own code and data repository? We have looked into this a little bit because sometimes it's not obvious where you should upload your code or data. But when we looked into it, it turned out there were quite a lot of legal and regulatory challenges that we would have to overcome. And so I think for now, at least, it would be a very major project for us to do well, and there would be some potential legal risks of doing it badly. So another thing that we thought about as a substitute for that was to at least provide some template data sharing agreements and code sharing agreements. But because of the international nature of ISMRM, that is also quite complex, but we think that we can, as a minimum, identify a few that are available on trusted sites and draw our authors' attention to those. So lastly, I would just leave you with these couple of websites. I want to thank Matthew and Nicola, who are members of the Reproducible Research Study Group and who've given me good guidance over the last couple of years as well. So I want to thank them. I will now try and unshare screens.
Thank you very much, Peter. It was a great update of what has been attempted and what has been done so far. We'll have more chance to speak a little bit later, because we are also joined now by Team Behrens from eLife, and he's going to talk about towards open publishing in eLife. I know that the journal is very innovative, pioneering a lot of open science practices, so we are all very much looking forward to hearing about it. Thank you very much, Tim, for joining us. You're currently muted in case you want to speak.
Hello, everybody. I'm sorry to be late. I was at a different meeting which was organized before I was invited to do this one just a couple of weeks ago. So I have to figure out, because I wasn't in the pre-chat thing, I have to figure out how to share my screen. Do I? So play slideshow and window. Can I share? Share screen window.
Since you're on the right track, I'm sure you'll work out.
I think this is going to work. How's this? Can you see?
Yes, that looks perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you about what eLife are doing that you may have seen people arguing about on Twitter an awful lot. And so you should ignore all those arguments and get excited by this new model. This is trying to do publishing backwards. So what we'd like to do is to implement a new model of publishing, which effectively makes people, which is much more effective for the authors, much more open, and it gives a mechanism to do what people have been looking at trying to do for ages. So all of your institutions and all of your funders have probably signed something called DORA, which is the Declaration of Research Assessment, which says, I will not judge you because you've got a Nature paper. I will judge you because your work is good. Despite signing that thing 10 years ago, they all still judge people on the basis of Nature papers. It's still the people with all the Nature papers that end up with all the jobs. And so that's because there's no mechanism for other kinds of judgment. And so we're trying to make one. And so this is called publishing, then review, then curation, or something like that. And this is our first step into this. Another way of thinking about it is the end of journals as publishers. So we're more like trying to be more like the Michelin guide that goes around trying to evaluate or curate a literature that already exists. And so I'll just give you a little bit of background into how that works. First, what are eLife? We are a non-profit journal covering all of bioscience and recently getting into medicine. And we were set up by the Howard Hughes, the Wellcome Trust, and the Max Planck to try to break publishing, to try to innovate, create, try to get out of this extremely profit-oriented world where private companies sell us prestige for enormous amounts of money, which is not good for science or the public or scientists. So they'd like to do that, and it's a very hard game because there's a big local minimum where people need to, where journals have reputations and scientists want some of that reputation for their own careers, and it's so important. And so you can imagine how this is a hard task. And so one of the ways in which eLife started off solving this hard task was to make a great journal, a very selective journal, a great journal, but one that was run by scientists and one where decisions were much more transparent. That was like eLife Mark 1. Effectively, can we compete with Nature, Science, and Cell, but make it a science-run journal, a scientist-run journal, and a really much friendlier publication experience where you wouldn't have to wait 2 years in review, and where it's just a better experience for the scientists. And that was like the first attempt to try to break this publishing model, and it had some really good successes. I think our decision making is more transparent. We've been publishing reviews for ages and been open and honest about how we make decisions. We have tried to have this consultative peer review process whereby reviewers get together and they're really clear about what the authors need to do to get accepted. And then we have a big line on open publication, so modernize the way science is communicated and shared. If you're on eLife, you can publish videos. If you're on eLife, you can even publish Jupyter notebooks. So people can actually interact with your data as part of the paper. And then we've always been big proponents of open access, open data, and open code as a mandatory requirement. So that was eLife Mark 1, and it had some big successes. I think it did turn the needle on a number of these issues. Like, for example, this consultative peer review process that we invented is now commonplace among many journals. And I think we were part of the push towards open science. But on the bigger mission of breaking publishing, it has totally failed, this attempt that we've made. We have made no dent at all into the large profiteering companies' profits, and we've made no dent at all into the reputation of those stellar journals. In fact, Nature can make a new journal every week, and they'll get more submissions than we will within a year. Nature Communications just gets ridiculous numbers of submissions, despite being a totally terrible journal. That's a quotable thing. That's a failure. This is what I want to say. So what I'm going to describe now is eLife Mark 2. So this is these are some problems with that is reflective of that failure, I think. So even if we had succeeded, just as some reflections, even if we had succeeded in making eLife Mark 1 take over from Nature and Cell and Science, we'd still be in this pretty nasty situation where we're just gatekeeping and telling people you can publish your work, you can't publish your work. Reviewers and editors have loads of power because they can literally tell people, they can literally decide what science gets seen, and it would also be, you could argue, would be replacing one evil with another. Instead of the Nature name, we would have ended up with the eLife name as the stellar one to that people would sell their children for. And so we feel that we both to make a big dent on the industry, and also because there are real failures with gatekeeping as a form of publishing, we feel that we want to do something really different. And so this is this is the background to why we can, because during that time when we were arguably failing, but also, I mean, we were inventing lots of interesting things, but arguably failing, bioRxiv was not failing. It was really succeeding. These are the monthly submissions to bioRxiv, which have been growing ridiculously. There's 4,000 a month submitted to bioRxiv now. And here's some fun where COVID started. You can see all the amateur epidemiologists getting involved. But bioRxiv is succeeding so much that sometime in 2020, 70% of the papers that we were reviewing were already published. Amazingly, we were not publishing these papers. We were not a publisher. They were already published. We were just like ticking them somehow. That one's all right. Archive submission a mandatory requirement of eLife submission. So now 100% of the papers that we are publishing are published already on bioRxiv. We are no longer the first time someone publishes a piece of work, it's done on bioRxiv, not at MRM or eLife, for the vast majority of things that we see now. Okay, so taking all those things into consideration, we wanted to make something new, and what we decided to make was something called Publish, Review, Curate, where you publish your work on our bioRxiv. We'll go and curate that literature into things that they'll try to understand which one of them have reliable results, which ones of them share their data, which ones of them are interesting and should be seen more broadly. A little bit like the Michelin Guide or the New York Times film reviews for already published restaurants or already published films. But in doing so, we are obviously faced with a problem, which is that authors aren't going to want to just have some peer reviews in their preprints, because they need to tell their funding agencies that they've got papers that are peer-reviewed papers and stuff. And so we have to design a mechanism whereby we can do the best of both worlds, where people can still get funded on the basis of these commentaries, but nevertheless, we don't act in the role of gatekeeper to publishing. And so this is what it looks like. We are effectively going to stop rejecting papers, as in everything that we review, we're going to publish. But alongside those papers, we are going to publish reviews and concise assessments, assessments that are concise and consistent enough that they can be used by funding agencies, that they'll tell you something interesting about the paper, how reliable the paper is, etc., etc. So this is this new kind of entity called a reviewed preprint, where the preprint is submitted to bioRxiv, and it's then annotated effectively by us with a commentary. Cool. And then this puts a lot of power in the hands of authors, right? Because the authors don't have to answer the reviewers' questions at all. They can just argue with them online, or they can just totally ignore them. They don't have to kowtow to the reviewers, because the reviewers are no longer gatekeeping whether their paper will be published. So it changes this dynamic between the authors and the reviewers. So when I say that, I mean, like, authors will say, okay, I'm fed up of this process now. I'm just going to cast this as the final version, my version of record, which eLife will essentially publish at any point then as a reviewed preprint with our annotated commentary, and that will be indexed in PubMed, and you can take it to your funding agency. Okay, so we think that this has some really key advantages, which will be attractive to authors and to the science community in general. Firstly, as I was saying, it restores control of publishing to authors. You will not be waiting 2.5 years for your paper to be published, to be reviewed 6 times at Nature or whatever you are doing. You can decide when you've done enough, and with your work. It focuses the attention on what the authors have published instead of where. So it really is a mechanism for losing journal name as a metric for careers, and it turns the key metric into these commentaries. And so obviously it puts a lot of pressure on us to write really good, reliable, trusted commentaries, but that's what we're going to try and do. Yep. So those are the key features of what we're doing. This is these commentaries, these brief commentaries, are going to use a shared vocabulary, which is going to provide consistency across the journal, and also will make it easy for external bodies like hiring agencies and granting agencies to understand what we mean when we're talking about our assessment. So, for example, we'll have clearly defined what, like, we could say the evidence is compelling. That means it's more rigorous than the current state of the art. Or we could say the evidence is solid. It's fine. The evidence is solid for this. It's just it's basically uses the right technology. Maybe a couple of weaknesses. And then we could say, well, this is a really fundamental discovery that should be seen by a lot of research areas, or we could say it's a valuable piece of work, but it's predominantly valuable within a field. I think this gives a lot of flexibility to the journal, or the curators, or whatever you want to call it. I think it's really good, because so many times when papers get rejected from these selective journals, there isn't really a good reason for it. It's just it's just like there's some arbitrary bar. It's like, it's not quite what I think of as an eLife paper, or not quite what I think of as a Nature paper. It's just not quite exciting enough. Nothing wrong with the paper at all. I believe the results, and having a mechanism to just say this is a valuable piece of work, and it's really good. It gives a lot of flexibility to the process, and I think it's just like almost categorically better. Like when I say when we're getting into a peer review consult at eLife, and someone says not quite an eLife paper, my heart just sinks. It's like, these people have got another 2 years. That one sentence you just uttered is going to cost them 2 years of their life. It's like a total nightmare. And so I think that this is just a better way of playing that game. Cool. Here's some examples of these kinds of things that we're trying to create. So this paper posits that higher uncertainty environments should lead to more reliance on episodic memory. This, finding compelling evidence for this idea across several analyses. That means it's a really better than most papers in terms of the evidence. It's an important paper. That means it's interesting broadly within the field and within a few related subfields. Or this is a landmark paper that's methodologically exceptional, a tour de force that ties together decades of advances in electron microscopy, blah, 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 blah. This is a description of the Drosophila connectome paper we published. That that kind of description, I think I would take over a Nature paper any day of the week. I don't know about all the funding agencies in Europe, but certainly in the ELC and in Wellcome, you're asked to describe what impact your work has made. Imagine how good it would be if you could use other people's independent words to do that rather than your own words. It would be much more compelling on grant applications to have these kinds of clear descriptions of how important or interesting your work is. So I think these are, I'm hopeful these are going to take off in granting agencies as well, because I always cringe when I have to write my own self-promotional stuff in grants. Okay, and so this is kind of what it will look like. Here's your paper with the title, and there'll be an abstract, and right here is going to be this evaluation, right? So this is like we're annotating these papers with our evaluation, and then you'll be able to go online and look at the reviews and see any part of it that you want to see. All right, that's I think all I wanted to say. Yeah, I don't need to talk about society. Okay, so with that, that's my case for the prosecution, and I'm happy to discuss. Cheers.
Thank you very much for being here, for participating. I think that everybody is really curious about your policy of publishing everything now. I think we have some time for discussion.
Well, just to be clear, we haven't got capacity to review everything that we.
Exactly. So this is actually one burning question that I've meant to ask you for weeks. I mean, for as long as that I've known, and I hope that since we are on the topic, wouldn't this decision give much more power to the editors and actually increase the arbitrary? How much arbitrary the decision is?
It depends on what you think. If it's the case that publishing in eLife is a good thing, then yeah. But that isn't what we're trying to do. Is kill the idea that publishing in eLife is a good thing. We want the thing that focuses, the thing that you pay attention to is not the name eLife anymore. It's the assessment, and that assessment will equally be bad. Will often be bad and often be good, right? So the editor. So here's the analogy, right? If you are an editor of the New York Times deciding what films to review, you definitely have influence, no question. But you're not having the influence about what papers get in. Like the influence is very different from the influence of what of being an editor saying this one gets into my journal, this one doesn't, because the New York Times doesn't publish a list of papers. It publishes of films. It publishes a star rating, and loads of those films are going to get 1 star. And a lot of those things they're going to review because they know they're going to get 1 star, and it's important to tell the world they're going to get 1 star. And so we might get plenty of, like in COVID, we would have definitely under this system have reviewed loads of awful papers with the ambition of telling the world this is an awful paper, right? We're not selecting papers because they are good. We're selecting papers because we think that it's valuable to have a review of them. In the same way that the New York Times thinks it's valuable to review some films and not others, or more valuable to review some films than others. Now, obviously, how broad the interest is does impact on how valuable the review is going to be. That's obviously true. And so you might say, doing triage this way is like melts down what we're doing. There's still some gatekeeping in there, and I think I would agree with that. But I also think that, and I also like if you have other ideas for how we should do triage, we are like totally going to triage didn't really focus in the new vision of eLife because the new version of eLife was what is the product, what are we trying to get scientists to care about as the product, not like figuring out the mechanics of how we did that. But over the next year or so, we will have a big sweeping review of things like triage. And so if you've got ideas for what we should be doing, do let us know. But that aside, I think that the basic answer to your question is, when the product is an evaluation, not a name, it's not the same as gatekeeping. There's clearly influence who we choose to review, but it's not who we choose to publish.
And Tim, do you plan to publish the or to create the opinion piece before or after the reviews have been received?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, it seems like there is this. I mean, I had the same question as Francesco to some extent, but I mean, you've got this process where you're deciding whether it's worthy of sending out for review, and you're still deciding on the criteria for that. And you could write some opinion at that point because you've had to make some judgment as to whether it's a good.
Oh, I see. We could publicly disclose to, yeah, we might well end up publicly disclosing the triage discussion. So I think what you're asking is, do we publicly disclose the triage discussion? The answer is the answer basically is we haven't touched triage except to make it about the reviews, about the value of the reviews rather than the value of the paper. That's the only change we've made to triage. But I strongly suspect we're going to make a much more distributed public triage system as well as part of this. That will be the next stage down the line. But the thing that will be attached to the paper will not be nothing to do with the triage system. The thing that will be attached to paper will be the reviews and the opinions of the reviewer and the assessment of the editor after discussion with the reviewers.
And that comes after the reviews are returned at every iteration. Then is that right? Yeah,
exactly. They're stuck on bioRxiv after every iteration, and then at any point in that process, the authors can say, "Make me a paper."
Oh, and I find it really revolutionary, and I have a little bit of hard time wrapping my head around it, because if you're the only ones doing it, then this might cause indeed some problems, because you might have a terrible paper published in eLife when eLife still has a very high impact factor, and then people look at the impact factor and say, okay, this must be a great paper, but actually you published
when they download that paper, the first thing it's going to say before the abstract is, this is a terrible paper.
I think you have too much faith in search committees and and the academic process that they're actually going to download the paper when they see that in the CV.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've been pretty public in the fact that we're breaking the name of eLife. I think that people know one thing that this enormous argument about it has achieved, which I think is great, is that people do know that an eLife paper will be different next year to how it is now. And so I also have more faith in search committees than you do. Although I don't think they'll read papers, but I think they might. I think if they see an eLife paper which they know comes with a concise commentary, I'm pretty sure that they'll read that. So Wellcome and HMI and ELC and various other funding agencies have said that you can put these commentaries in your grant proposal now.
This is it's fantastic. I think it's really a fantastic leap forward, and I see still some problematic in the current publishing world.
I mean, it will. I'm sure it will evolve, but you can see I'm sure it will evolve, but you can see the direction that it's going, right? I mean, like.
Yeah. So I'm really sorry. I didn't want to monopolize the discussion. Sophie, go ahead and.
Yeah, no, thank you to all of our speakers. Let's not make it just about eLife, this discussion, but yeah, I'm thinking about like how. Almost we need to change our vocabulary in terms of what a journal is and what the role of a journal is. And that's something that I wanted to kind of bring to the floor for all of you, is like, you all represent very different kinds of journals and kinds of publishing research. And yeah, I'd be interested to hear about how you see yourself, like your role as in the scientific ecosystem, and what the role of your publication is. And that's kind of related to one of the questions that I put in the Q&A box as well, which is kind of since preprints separate this sharing of science from the quality control, how can you separate the quality control as well, and what is the journal's part in that? I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Sanchari wants to start with the role of preprints, and we can go from there.
Sure, I can start. So going back to the point about vocabulary, the one thing that we try and be consistent with when we talk about bioRxiv is we never say a work is published on bioRxiv. We always make sure we clarify that it's posted on bioRxiv, because publishing is often used as a synonym for the certification process that journals provide, which we do not intentionally. So all preprints on bioRxiv and medRxiv are posted, not published. And I think, like Tim mentioned in his talk at some point, like the popularity of preprints and how it has grown over the recent years, I think it's our job as we see it is to provide the niche, the atmosphere, and the availability of enough scientific work for the publishing and the certification system to evolve. And eLife is an excellent example for that. I think there are things that can be changed. It shouldn't take 2 years to get a couple of scientists to say whether this is good science or bad science. Like, they're doing it. People who read the preprints, people whose work it's closest to, are reading them within the week, and they are coming to decisions. They are making judgments. And it shouldn't take 2 years for a system to say the same thing. And it's not like they are giving you access to all of what they are thinking, all of how they are judging. It's just one line. It's now published in blah and blah journal. So I think the way we see it, we provide the platform for other mechanisms to develop.
Okay, do you want me to come in next as the sort of boring old traditional journal? I mean, I think part of what MRM offers at the moment is that kite mark from our peer reviewers. We have expert deputy editors, so the process is that I would assign each manuscript to an expert deputy editor. They know the field, they know the reviewers, and one of the comments that I do get back hearteningly often, and please do feedback both positive and negative comments to me, but I do get quite a lot of authors who say it was refreshing to have reviewers who understood the paper, because I think the big problem with many journals, especially big journals that don't really know their audience, is that you know, they're sending these papers out to random reviewers who maybe don't understand the work. And I think that although it's not infallible, I'm not going to pretend it's infallible. I think we more often than not get reviewers who do appreciate and understand the work. In terms of the 2-year issue, I'm very glad to say that I don't think that ever happens with MRM. We're not a super selective journal. I mean, clearly we don't publish everything, but we're not Nature and Science and so on. We usually get our reviews back within about a month, and obviously there's some period of time when the authors are dealing with their comments. But off the top of my head, I can't give you the exact figure, but I would say that most authors have a definite outcome within, say, 4 months or so, maybe 5 months, if it's a major revision. But I think what the traditional journal model offers is that peer review step, and so it depends on whether you think that's really important or not. And maybe I'm old school. I still think that it's.
But Peter, why does the peer review step why does the kite mark? I mean, you could just stick your kite mark on bioRxiv. Why does the kite mark have to be associated with the publishing? That's all we're doing.
Yeah.
We're still doing the peer review.
I'm not going to defend the exact model, and I think you're right that maybe it could be enough thumbs up and enough thumbs down on bioRxiv or whatever. It's a different way of doing it. I mean, one thing that I would say, I mean, Sophie asked, how do we see ourselves in the future? The one thing that I can be fairly confident of is that, publishing is going to look pretty different in, 5 to 10 years from what it does now. I don't exactly know which direction it's going. I think we're all kind of feeling our way and responding to what people want. Yeah, that would be my initial comment.
Thank you very much, Peter. I don't know if Sarahanne is here and wants to comment as well, but otherwise I think it would be great to go on to the question that is top voted in the Q&A box at the moment from Nicholas Dikov. He's saying first that he's very happy to see that everybody is putting on preprints, but his question is regarding going beyond PDFs, incorporating data, text, and provenance. So he's mentioning they recently started neuralibre.org preprint server for research objects that go beyond the PDF. How are journals and preprint services planning to accommodate interactive preprints? And I think it's particularly important with the development of language models that can emulate scientific text. So maybe Sanchari can go first again, since this is specifically about preprints.
Okay, so this is an interesting thought. Like, we at present at bioRxiv, we do require submissions to be complete research articles in order to be posted. So if you talk about alternative interactive formats, we are not there yet. We do have more recent developments, like we have very recently added the video feature where conferences and other seminar organizers can link videos that are based on a preprint to the preprint. So there is an alternative form for readers to access. And we have been talking internally about how can we make it more Audible friendly. Can we have like reading services that people can just like turn on, and instead of actually reading the preprint, they can select sections that the software then will read back. But this is not probably what we're talking about here. We do have data sharing capabilities. Like in the submission system, we just provide a link, a box where you can add any link for data sharing. You can link to your GitHubs, you can link to your lab repositories with data. We are very open. We don't make decisions. We leave it entirely upon the authors to decide how much and what kind of data they want to share. One of the things that we keep talking about when we go for interacting with scientists is, if you see something is missing, if you think that the paper needed access to some kind of data that is not being provided, please comment on the preprint, and we as moderators, we make it a priority to approve those comments so that authors are aware that there is some data that needs to be shared. But I think for making it more interactive, there needs to be more, I think, interesting technical developments that at some point, if it's relevant and if it's reliable, I think bioRxiv is fairly open to partnerships about these things. But we just want it to be something that's reliable. It's not going to be like there for 2 months and then go away. And it has to work. It can't break down after uploading something 2 weeks from the upload date. So at this point, we don't have a lot to offer on that front. We are continuously thinking and looking for partners, but yeah, I think we'd be open.
I think we should close soon, but I would like to give Sarahanne the occasion to speak a little bit more about her journal, because specifically, basically, you are only accepting null results. What are the what are the acceptance criteria then in your journal? And I think this is something that probably all traditional journals could learn from.
Yeah, so we're really quite broad in terms of what we accept, providing that it in some sense engages with the issues of mistakes in science, the messy sides of science, reflecting on these issues from say a philosophy of science perspective. We're interested in empirical articles which kind of explore some of these issues on a meta level, as well as showing, say, flaws in a technique that was used or a method that was used and reflecting on that flaw. So we have a super broad scope. I would say, and it's certainly broader than the other journal I edit for, which is Collaborative Psychology, and other journals I've had experience with. So it's super broad, and we really are just focused on, you know, engaging with this question of what's gone wrong in your scientific process, you being the submitting author. So we're super broad. We love null results too. They're certainly a big part of what we do. But basically, we kind of like to say that it's anything that a traditional journal won't accept. Obviously, there are, you know, limits to that, but that's kind of our philosophy anyway.
But the science should be rigorous. This is something you stressed in your presentation.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And what we enjoy doing is encouraging authors, and for people to reflect on what those authors say, encouraging authors to really focus on, you know, these issues of rigor and what has gone wrong. So despite being rigorous, despite, you know, these checks and balances, despite safeguards, this went wrong or this went differently, and learning from that aspect of the process, that messiness of the research process.
I think that rigor is probably something that for sure will go also in the triage process of eLife when you go and evaluate your submissions.
Just a quick point about PDFs being the main sort of source of scientific communication. One initiative that we're really starting to see an increase of interest in say the meta science community and in some of the social sciences is with modular publishing. So for example, Research Equals, which is a platform that's started by Liberate Science. That's a platform that does what we call modular publishing. So instead of having a single, you know, static article, you have modules of a research life cycle, which are dynamic, which each have a DOI, which are, you know, you can associate data and materials and all sorts of different elements of the research process. It's little sort of chunks of the research process that are all collected together. But because the research process doesn't tend to happen linearly, that format kind of focuses on that aspect and that living aspect of research, a little bit like what F1000 sort of takes into account as well. Octopus Publishing is another similar platform that hasn't quite got itself off the ground yet, but does a similar thing as what Research Equals does. And as a third idea, we have FlashPub, which is a micro-publishing platform. And again, that's doing a similar thing. So we're focusing, you know, taking a little bit of the interest off these static, and as Sanchari said before, you know, we can't change a paper really easily once it's been published. You know, but that's why some of these platforms are interested in focusing on this dynamic living aspect of the research process and that output, you know. So that's just, you know, new initiatives that are coming out that people might be interested in hearing about and looking into for themselves.
Very interesting ideas. I just want to also make sure people know. So Nicola, who's on screen now, we probably just mentioned briefly, is making this thing called NeuroLibra, but go check it out. It is cool. It's like bioRxiv but for Jupyter notebooks, and which is super. I mean, Jupyter notebooks are so powerful. When you play with them, you can get inside the data, but you can also write a paper. It's a really great idea also to try to make them articles. It's something, as you know, Nicola, that we're working on at eLife, but they feel really good. I mean, Nicola published one of our first ever Jupyter notebooks at eLife, and it's super fun. It's much more fun than seeing you can go and, it's a meta-analysis, and you can go and like dig in and see all the individual papers and link and bring up data from them. It's like really a different experience from reading a static paper. And so I think that's an exciting thing that we're doing, but I think having the NeuroLibra as a preprint server there is great.
The nice thing is that eLife was the only journal that would make this possible. You know, like we had it, and basically I contacted Tim. I said, we have this. It's a meta-analysis. There's a template if other people want to use it. Can you have a way of hosting it? In the end, they said, sure. They included a link to our preprint. And we haven't really gelled it to a point where it can be a preprint submitted to eLife, evaluated by eLife. But we had a call with Andy Collins, actually, thinking about, can we make this a little bit more streamlined? And I feel that GPT chat, Galactica are showing how cheap words are going to get very soon. So if we expect
so you want
10 years in the future, I feel that the provenance, what Sarahanne mentioned, is really important. How did this all connect together?
Thank you so much. And yeah, we are unfortunately running out of time now, but thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to Nicola for coming up and discussing with us. For everyone that didn't get their question answered yet, I hope we can meet in Gathertown and continue the discussion. Additionally, Nicola is going to be presenting on Neuralibre in the next session, which will take place in approximately 3 hours. So yeah, hope to see you all online then, or watching the recordings later as well. Thank you so much for a great session.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.